Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 301 of the Stacey West podcast. I'm your host, Ben, and this week I'm joined by Charlie. How you doing, mate? You keeping well?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster today being a Lincoln fan, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, I'm doing good. I've got the flat to myself at uni at the minute because obviously all of university is basically now finished. My flatmates moved out last week, so I've got the run of the place. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you've had to put some clothes on and everything just for this. It's insane.
No.
But look, yeah, it is obviously Tuesday. It's not Thursday. We are early with the podcast this week for what would probably be some quite obvious reasons, but there is quite a lot to talk about. We were actually talking about doing the early pod or one on Friday this week because of availability for everybody. And then our hand was slightly forced by some news. So yeah, we'll get into the big talk or the big talking point in a few minutes, but we'll start with some good positive news. On Monday, the Imps announced that we have signed a keeper, which we obviously spoke about on 300. So we will discuss a little bit further. But we have brought in Jamie Pardington from Wolves, Wolves' academy, 23-year-old goalkeeper who has previously worked under Scott Fry. He's been brought in, according to Jez, to really fight for that number 2 spot behind Lucas Jensen. It's one that we spoke on Friday on the podcast. I didn't necessarily see us bringing in an extra keeper, but the fact is we have, and then it puts us back up to a contingent of 3. So we don't have a huge amount of info on Jamie's performances and stuff due to being more based around academy football and youth football. But Charlie, your thoughts on Jamie Pardington's signing?
Well, I think there's 2 things here. First of all, we didn't sign him from Wolves' academy. He's not been there for 2 years, but we'll ignore that. He came from Cheltenham.
Sorry, I've read the first sentence of the announcement and I've got very confused because I've gone, yeah, graduate of the Wolves Academy. I was like, oh, that's where we got him from. No, yes, yeah, well, you are correct.
Not quite. But yeah, I think I was expecting us actually to bring in somebody else when we had these discussions on Friday. I just feel like having a slightly stronger contingent is better. And Sam Long, I don't quite know what his future is at this football club, if I'm honest. It's, we're all just trying to read between the lines on this. Does that mean that he's maybe going to go out on loan again? Does that mean we're going to try and get a little bit of money for him this summer? And maybe that's the end of his Lincoln City pathway. Sorry, I'm not Chris. What do we do with Sam Long? I think that's kind of the big question here. But sort of removing ourselves away from that, we've got a player who is seemingly quite highly rated at clubs that he's been at. Cheltenham, okay, he didn't really play any minutes for Cheltenham apart from in the last game of the season where he played just over 60 minutes against Stevenage, and that was only because Luke Southwood, the sort of starting goalkeeper at Cheltenham, got injured in that game, so he had to come on. Now Luke Southwood, for those of you who maybe don't know, at Cheltenham, top level goalkeeper. He will be top end League One minimum, I think, this season, and that's the sort of caliber that he had to be number two for. And by all accounts at Cheltenham, he was a strong enough number 2 that helped push Luke Southwood on, and was also able to then come in whenever sort of needed. Now, like I say, he played those 60 minutes in the last game of the season. Okay, I conceded 2 goals, but we really can't read into that. Even if I did joke off air with Ben that means we should just get rid of him, and he's obviously no good. Obviously, that is a joke. And former Grimsby as well. So we've swapped goalkeepers, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Jordan Wright going out, it did lead to a conversation on the podcast on Friday between, I think, it might have been the 3 of us, it was 3 of us, where we said about where does this, where would it potentially leave, where would it leave the goalkeeping situation, given that, we've got 3 on our books now. Where does this leave Sam Long? Where does it leave his position with the club? And to be honest, I can probably see an additional loan spell for Sam. Whether that's a loan with a view to buy sort of position, maybe going back up to Scotland. Obviously, he's had a season unbeaten at Falkirk. It's at this point, I think it would make sense to try and cash in on Sam Long if we can, and if there is the ability to do so with with the club that is maybe familiar with. And it would, I don't know, it's one of those discussions that we've had around the quote unquote model. We'll get a young player, we'll bring him in through the academy, and then that will then continue to grow, and we'll get money for players that we've developed. So I can see him staying officially on the club's book at the moment, and then maybe going out with a view to somebody buying him in January. But yeah, I can't see a way back into the first team for Sam Long, given this news, particularly as we have Lucas Jensen on a decent length contract. I believe he's got another year and a half or 2 years on his deal, and then also Pardington coming in on a 2-year deal as well, which would take him through to 2026. So yeah, definitely an interesting conversation to be had around our goalkeeping situation. What would your real sort of take on it be before we move on to the big sad?
Okay, so I think with Pardington coming in on a 2-year deal, we know that Lucas Jensen has 1 year left. Now, without kind of speculating what's going to happen after this season, because we've still got a whole season worth of football to play, and who knows where we'll be this time next summer. But let's just say, hypothetically, Lucas does go, and we're still in League One this time next year. Who knows? Pardington might see himself being the natural successor to Lucas Jensen and need to kind of prove himself in that role this time, over this next year. I think that second goalkeeper's definitely the hardest position. It must be to be a football player. It must be the hardest position because of how much extra you have to fight and probably how fewer opportunities you get compared to anywhere else on the pitch. You don't get subbed on for the last 20 minutes of a game and are able to show something off. Jack Moylan, for example, got a great run of games in a lot because he came on at half-time against Barnsley and ended up getting 2 goals and ripped the Barnsley defence a new one. You're not going to be able to get the opportunity to do that as a goalkeeper, so it's a really difficult position to kind of come in. But Jamie Pardington is coming in, knowing that he'll be number 2, by the way. Let's not pretend like he's going to think that he's going to suddenly take over from Lucas Jensen on the first game of the season. He'll know what his role is going to be, and he's obviously willing to accept that and try to fight for something better and probably push Lucas Jensen on, which, by all accounts, he's done at Cheltenham with Luke Southwood. So overall, I think this is it's a good signing. It's something that we need to do. It's the kind of squad depth that we need to have. And for Sam Long as well, we're not having to kind of rely on him sitting on the bench. He can go out if we want him to. It just kind of frees up our decisions on that front as well. So it's time that we need to make, and obviously the recruitment. So I'm pleased with that overall.
Yeah, I can probably see, like I said, Sam going out on loan until maybe January, and then we'll see what the situation is with Lucas around that point. If he's looking like he may potentially leave the club at the end of the season, or indeed in January, then we'll bring Sam back, or whatever the strategy is going to be. I'm sure we'll appreciate it when it happens. However, we are just delaying the inevitable at this point. We should probably bring it up and let's talk about it. Lasse Sorensen going to Huddersfield Town for an undisclosed fee. It's one of those that we kind of saw coming but didn't want it to. Obviously, the news at the end of the season was that Lasse had signed we triggered a 1-year extension on his contract as part of an option by the club. And I think at that point, even Jez said, this may be kind of a formality in that, it would enable us to get a fee for Lasse. And it sounds like that's exactly what we've done. It sounds like the fee, there's some speculation from Radio Lincolnshire that we'll talk about in a moment, but it sounds like the fee is quite substantial. But yeah, it's from a footballing perspective, it's gutting to lose Lasse, particularly around the off-pitch stuff as well. Like, he's just been a great community ambassador. But where does it leave us in terms of the squad depth and everything else? Does this mean Jay Ben's going to come back and stake his claim, or what do you reckon, Charlie? What do you think?
Well, I think first of all we have to acknowledge the great player and person that we've lost here in Lasso. I say lost like he's dead. He's not. He's just gone to Huddersfield.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
I just feel like we have to kind of acknowledge that, because first of all, his attitude off the pitch, incredible. You know, he is exactly what any media team would want out of a football player, because he's always willing to go the extra mile for people. He's always willing to take part in community events. Look at Lasse on Coffee. Okay, so Watts on Coffee, Nigel Watts, one of the fans at the club, sort of does this social media. Every time he goes for a coffee somewhere, he'll take a photo of it, put it on social media, that sort of thing. And then the club, sort of Alan Long and Nigel, got in contact with the club and tried to organise this Lasse on Coffee event, because Lasse is a big sort of coffee fan.
Yep.
And then boom, they did, and they started doing little community ones where Lasse and Nigel and Alan would go to community centres across Lincolnshire and have coffees, little cafes and things like that, so that people could meet Lasse. I went to one. Chris came along with me, and we were just sat there for hours, just talking with Lasse about anything football, even away from football as well, just having general conversations. And it was really, really nice to speak to somebody so sort of approachable, and that's what Lasse was.
Yeah,
he was always approachable and things like that. And I know Gaz, came up with sort of a lovely story during his live earlier on about how when he took his nephew to go meet him, even afterwards, instead of Lasse just driving past and sort of putting his hand up to say goodbye, he rolled down the window, stopped, and sort of wanted to properly say goodbye as though they were close friends. And that's exactly what he could do with every single person. I was shocked the second time I saw Lasse, he then recognised me after that first time. And that's what he's able to do. He's not just able to fake, if you like, all this sort of media output. He's able to do it, really do it. And also, then that translated to on the pitch, because that right-hand side he made his own for the last 18 months. And I remember having this conversation with Jez George, because he turned around and said, the upturn in Lasse's confidence and the upturn in Lasse's performances didn't come from the switch in position. It might be easy to pinpoint that, sure. It didn't come from that. It came as soon as fans started chanting his name. Yeah. Because then he bought into that. And then he wanted to show more. And that just boosted his confidence in all of this. So Lasse is a great player, great man, hugely missed. Now, in terms of what that means for us as Lincoln City, it's really, really difficult and heartbreaking in a way as a fan when you lose a fan favourite like that. The same when it happened with Toffolo. I think that's a lot. What a lot of the I know that's sort of what a lot of the comparisons have been made, and obviously rightly so for a lot of reasons. Fullback, Huddersfield, and so on and so forth. But in terms of business, brilliant business. Now, when it's funny because thinking back to the retained list coming out. And that was when it was announced that Lasse's contract extension had been triggered. Everybody saw that as a positive and was, oh, yeah, great. We're not losing him for free. This is great. For me, that was an immediate negative, because the way I understand it is that Jez, and it's confirmed sort of in some of the quotes today, that Jez and the rest of the club were trying throughout the whole year to extend Lasse's contract. But negotiations obviously didn't quite go as well as we maybe would have hoped, and we didn't get that contract extension. So therefore, the triggering of the clause was simply a formality to say, okay, well, we're not going to lose you on a free, but well, if we let you go this summer, we're going to get a substantial fee for you, and that's what's happened. So I'm actually not surprised that it has happened. I'm a little bit surprised in the sense that, again, from sort of conversations, I was expecting us to be really ambitious this year, not a do or die like a Wigan maybe. We've spoken about them off air, where they maybe overspend to get themselves promoted, and if they don't, then they're in a terrible situation. But more the fact of, okay, we're going to try and keep you in the thinking that having you for 12 months is better than whatever value we get. But obviously, we set a target at that, and Huddersfield have reached it, whatever that may be. Yeah. So I'm really pleased with that. And the thing is, Regan Poole, the club got vilified with Regan Poole last year because they made that decision of, okay, actually it's better to have you around for 6 months than it is to let you go for whatever money. Like at the time, I mean, the papers will have been wrong on this, but at the time it was touted at like 750 grand. That wouldn't have been the case.
No, well, I mean, the thing is, we spoke about this again briefly before we came on air, and we said the thing is with Poole, at that point in time, we were desperate for a defender. Like if he'd have gone, we would have been absolutely screwed, and we probably would have been flirting with the wrong end of the table for a lot longer than we were. But this is, like you say, this is an example of shrewd business by the club. I'm kind of with you in that the conversation around when the extension was triggered, obviously, it is a formality at that point that it is going to be done. And I think, like you say, the conversation that Liam's had on Radio Lincolnshire today, where he said there were discussions around trying to extend his contract, and the club aren't going to break the wage structure for any one player. That, to me, while it is obviously disappointing that we've lost Lasse and he's gone to Huddersfield, that's reassuring to me as a fan, in that you're not going to have, one player dictate, well, I'm not staying unless you give me 15 grand a week or whatever it's going to be, because there will be clubs in the division that buckle for that, the likes of big spending clubs, Huddersfield being one of them. We'll come on to that in a second. But the fact is that he obviously knows that he is able to get more than he was on at Lincoln at another club. Not a surprise. And the club have been, both parties, by the sounds of it, incredibly professional with the way that it's all been handled. So, yeah, I mean, it's a real disappointment. And just going back to what you were saying about Lasse being approachable and everything else, I mean, we went to the darts evening at the club, and he was just unbelievable in that. There was a table of kids in front of where we were sat, and even when he had his matches, like he'd come back and he'd be chatting with the kids about, I think they had the Ultimate Team game on the phone for FIFA or EAFC, and he was talking to them, and he was genuinely interested in it. It wasn't kind of that typical, oh yeah, okay, like when Gaz talks to me about anything, and you get that reaction of, yeah,
Just
all right,
Gaz.
okay. But
isn't that what Rachel does when you talk to her as well?
Yeah, that's fair, actually. But like it was a genuine warmth and a genuine interest from Lasse. And I mean, even going back to even at the awards night, one of the guys that I sit near in the stand is a big fan of Lasse, and I said to him, look, could you just do us a quick video for him to say thank you for the support for the season? And he went, yeah, sure. And that was outside, and he just grabbed my phone and went backstage because he knew it'd be a bit more quiet, and he was able to record something. And he came back, and a good couple of minutes later, he just went, yeah, sorry, I rambled a little bit. I was, it's fine. Like he gets it. We've spoken about players in the past about at the club who just get it, and for me, Lasse is one of those, and his I'm sure his presence and his performances will be missed in equal measure. But it just adds yet another thing to the list of things that I don't like Huddersfield for. Obviously, we have Toff, we have the George Kane incident. With Pavel Abbott scoring, and then we have the playoffs, and then we also have the Emily game at the McAlpine, which isn't technically Huddersfield, but one of my worst memories. And now we have Lasse. So, yeah.
On the slight flip side to that, though,
yeah,
Huddersfield have probably now given us more money, in the past few years than we've got from any other club.
It's very true. It's very true.
Well, especially, I mean, in fact, I wouldn't be too surprised if they've given us more money in the past few years than we've got from any
most of the signings. Yeah,
club put together. Considering tough, especially if you include the sell-on clause,
the add-on fees. Yeah.
Tough, Lasse, the Cowleys. That's going to all add up to a couple of million, probably. So,
yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
So look, obviously they are spending big. It's potentially an indication of their position. You've mentioned about where we potentially see some clubs finishing in the division. We will have some more previewing ahead for the season coming up on the podcast. But just as an indication, where we are at the moment, I'm feeling a little bit more apprehensive than I did yesterday about the season. I know obviously there is still investment to come, and we will talk about that shortly. But yeah, I think there's going to be some teams that are spending very big, and it seems a bit boom or bust for a couple of them, doesn't it?
Yes, in a way, purely because of the sort of financial barriers that could potentially be put in place soon with an independent regulator.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously everything with that is currently up in the air.
Yeah.
Blooming election cycles, honestly. But this isn't a politics podcast, so we're not going to go down that road.
No.
But yeah, so it is, and there are a lot of clubs that are spending big. You know, Huddersfield, Charlton, and a few others that are expected to be spending a lot more money than what we are on wages. We've got a clear wage structure. But at the same time, I'm still more than happy with the position that we're in. And I'm more than happy with the position that we're in compared to some of these others. A lot of these clubs are, in a way, maybe doing that kind of do or die. As you've said, they are going to be spending big and they're going to be putting together heavy financial squads.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we're building, and I feel like this summer is less about us building a whole new squad, which is what a lot of these are going to be doing. A lot of these are going to be making massive wholesale changes to their squads and doing big rebuilds. I mean, look at Rotherham, for example. I know Steve Evans does his business early, but they really don't need to go ahead and sign 8 players before the window opens or whatever it was. No. So they're going to have to make wholesale changes. What we're doing is we're filling in the gaps. Yeah. And yes, okay, there is now a new gap created because we don't have Lasse Sorensen, and we are going to need somebody to fulfill either that position or a slightly different one, which is something I'm going to come on to in a second. But we don't need to rebuild the whole team. We've already got a very, very strong squad. And to be honest, if we went into this season playing a starting 11 full of players that we currently have, I would be more than happy with what we've got. Apart from, at the minute, that kind of right side defensive role, purely because we don't actually have anybody really there apart from Jay Ben, who obviously could come back from Solihull Moors, but he had an injury hit season. And although they really rated him there, he'll probably need another loan, if I'm honest, or maybe this is his opportunity to move on elsewhere for his career. I don't know.
Well, I think that's going to be the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, given the rumored numbers, and again, this is heavily rumored, we don't know. But Radio Lincolnshire seemed to suggest that after add-ons and other fees for Lass, we could potentially be looking at somewhere in the region of around $500,000. Now, that sounds like a lot of money because it is. But I think realistically, when you're talking about the initial numbers, you're probably looking at in the region of about 253. I would again at a guess. So yeah, it sounds like we may have a decent chunk of change to go after a few players. For example, one of the players that we have been heavily linked with over the past few weeks, which started off as a rule of 3, definitely not story, but has grown into something that sounds a little bit more solid. And Radio Lincolnshire believe that there is a medical due for Tom Bayliss to come into the club. So you wrote the piece a little bit earlier on after that the exclusive broke from Football Insider, I believe it was. So give us the lowdown on Tom Bayliss.
Well, first of all, I don't think it was ever necessarily a definite no, even though it did fall foul of this typical rule of 3, because it seems like the sort of player that we are always going to be after. Mm-hmm. Now, it's really difficult with these because normally when Lincoln get rumoured with a player and it's coming from one of these sort of journalists, actually most of the time it's normally false because it is very, very rare that any rumours normally break on Lincoln City players that actually end up happening because of how sort of tight the club try and keep news like that. But obviously this time it seemingly has broke, especially now if Radio Lincolnshire are commenting that a medical is on the way for Tom Bayliss. Now, Shrewsbury Town midfielder, he is released on a free this summer, 25 years old. Now, a lot of reports coming out of Shrewsbury, and if this signing does happen, we will have a YouTube video dedicated to who is Tom Bayliss with a Shrewsbury fan on it. But before that, a lot of sort of social media speculation about him seems to be maybe that he's a bit of an inconsistent player, somebody who's maybe not quite been able to cement himself a starting position really anywhere that he's been fully, but he's somebody that's quite clearly got a lot of pedigree, somebody that's highly rated at certain clubs. He's moved on for £1.5 to £1.8 million earlier on in his career, going from Coventry to Preston. You don't do that unless you're an exciting youngster. And although it may not have necessarily gone exactly as Preston, who were the buying club in that scenario, would have liked, he's got a League One promotion on his CV already with Wigan back in 2022. And again, he didn't maybe play too many games in that. And I'm saying all of this, and it might sound like it's coming across as a negative, but actually I think it's the total opposite. Because what Michael Skubala has already shown that he can do is he can get the best out of every single player that comes through his door. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that he could maybe do with Tom Bayliss here. If he is a player who has just failed to show that consistency, maybe been a little bit underwhelming in some of his recent spells, Michael Skubala is probably the one manager that can get him out of that into a first team regular starter, maybe, or squad player, and bring him back up to that pedigree that he originally showed in his early Championship days or League One days, if you like. That's exactly why I think this is actually a potential good deal if it does happen. Now, it's interesting as well for another reason, because midfielder. That would make it 4 first-team ready midfielders if he does come in after Conor McGrandle signs, and that's forgetting Ali Smith is also still technically a Lincoln City player as well. We don't quite know what's going to happen with him yet. So there's a real interesting discussion point around that now. And that's something I wanted to mention sort of when we were talking about Lasse. It's better to mention it now. 4 at the back.
Okay.
We've now gotten rid of Lasse Sorensen, who was our right wing back and maybe would have struggled to play right back. So we've probably got that tactical flexibility now, depending on who we bring in. 4 midfield options, potentially, if Tom Bayliss does come in, plus Ali Smith as well could make it 5 if he does kind of cement a spot. And potentially, who knows, we might bring in 1 or 2 more. Rasheen Gallagher could come back from his loan. Is coming back from his loan at Drogheda, and who knows where he's going. So 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. Is there the potentiality there? I'd say so.
Yeah, it does raise a lot of questions, doesn't it? Although it will fall foul of Chris's sworn "Thou shalt play 3 at the back," so he might fall out of love a little bit with Skubala. Who am I kidding? He's never going to fall out of love with Skubala.
Who can?
What a guy! No, look, it's an interesting rumor that seems to be gaining a lot of credibility the further along it goes, particularly, like I say, with Radio Lincolnshire dropping the hints that it could be a case of just waiting for a medical to come through. So, yeah, again, not a player that I'm overly familiar with, but like you say, if the reports are that he's got the quality, but maybe he's a little bit inconsistent. You need a good coach to get the best out of you, and I think we've got one of the better coaches in the division, if not probably the best head coach in the division. I'm not going to go quite that far, I think, but yeah.
Well, I mean, statistically, Nathan Jones is the best head coach in the whole of Europe, as he told everybody. But
yeah, but statistically, Sam Allardyce is the most successful England manager.
Yeah, but that's not even debatable. He just is. I mean,
So yeah, look, it's definitely one to keep an eye on. We will talk a little bit more about some potential future business. The other side of an advert, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're watching us on YouTube, hello. Don't forget, we do go live when we record the podcasts live, but this one's just a little bit earlier for obvious reasons. So we'll see you on the other side of an ad break. We don't know what the ad's going to be.
Quarter pounder with cheese.
buy burgers.
Have we still got the Mackey's adverts? Actually,
I don't know if we have.
I don't know if that's tipped over now.
I think it may have tipped over, but
just go buy Mackey's anyway. There you go, free advertising from McDonald's.
I'm hungry now. Okay, so we'll come back in. And there we go. That is an advert of some description. We don't know what it will have been. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit now about some more transfer business. Now, the Radio Lincolnshire team put out one of their Red Imps Club podcasts a little bit earlier on today, which featured a very good interview with Liam Scully. So if you haven't listened to it, do go check it out. But we're going to break down some of the stuff that's been spoken about in there. I mean, first off, Charlie, the candor and the sort of openness that Liam could go into, we've come to expect it by this point, but it's always nice to hear, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. It is now expected whenever Liam or Jez or Clive or anybody from the football club comes on to do kind of a special podcast like that. just to speak about anything to do with transfers and things like that. Actually, they're always just really frank, and they explain it to us as fans, just like we're adults, and they just explain, okay, look, this is actually what's going on. We obviously can't exactly say the player's name because that's not fair on them, but this is what's going on. It might happen, it might not. This is the current barrier. This is why we needed to do such a thing, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And actually, it just helps you have a lot more faith in what it is that they're doing, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything they do. I think it just helps you build faith in the knowledge that what they're doing, they believe is at least right, and they can explain why they think it's right, rather than just punts like some clubs do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, the biggest focus of the talk was obviously around Lasse's deal and what the club are going to get from it. There was a little bit of probing question, but Liam, as always, plays it back with a pretty straight bat and says, I can't tell you this because X, Y, Z. It's confidentiality, the undisclosed fee situation. We've spoken about it on here many times. You kind of need that competitive advantage in terms of the transfer market where the other teams won't necessarily know exactly what you've received for the player at this time, so they can't stack an extra digit on there on the players that you might want to be purchasing. So we'll move away from the talk around Lasse, but two big names that came out of that, which I don't think there will be too many surprises around. We had essentially confirmation that barring a big change of heart and a big U-turn on the players' sides, it sounds like Ted Bishop and Danny Mandroiu will have played their last games in a Lincoln City shirt. Now, I'm a big Ted Bishop fan. I think when he's able to keep himself fit and when he's able to play alongside certain other players in the squad, he is an absolute asset to the club. Now, again, this may be going back to what we said about the wage structure. No one player is bigger than the club. We will always have to fit each player into each category and then say, right, this is the wage. This is what you're going to be offering. We're not necessarily going to budge on that. And it sounds like the talks kind of broke down with both Ted and Danny Mandroiu. So it appears they're going to be leaving the club. So, I mean, thoughts on Ted first, Charlie?
Look, Ted is a fantastic player and has shown himself to be a fantastic player across all 3 seasons. He may have had ups and downs for various reasons, and we can sit here and speculate. Gaz has done many an article about, is it just the fact that he needed to play in his preferred position? Is it the fact that he just needed a run of games? Is his injury worries actually as bad as what some people may suggest? And so on and so forth. We can sit here and speculate that until the cows come home. But at the end of the day, Ted Bishop is a strong League One footballer. It's going to be a big shame if we have seen the end of him, but at the same time, I'm actually not that bothered because I just don't think his record was quite good enough for where we want to be. And if we've already seemingly starting to look at replacing him, and we're already looking at other options in that midfield, it's not actually as big of a miss as maybe it immediately seems. We want to take that next step. You're going to have squad turnover at some point, and we can't sit here and say that we want to improve and get better next season, but then still have the same players every year. Yeah. Especially those that are on the slightly older side of the spectrum, which Ted's not old by any stretch of the imagination, but he's on the older side of the squad.
He's one of the senior players, shall we say.
So to let him go and then potentially bring in somebody slightly younger, probably something for the better. But obviously, we do only sign under 23 players.
Of course, yeah. We only sign players under 23, definitely, yeah. But look, I mean, the obvious other one is Danny Mandroiu. Now, we've famously said on the podcast multiple times that you can't play Danny Mandroiu and Ted Bishop together. Well, we won't be playing either of them next season by the sounds of it. And yeah, I think Danny Mandroiu is a bit of an enigma when it comes to how his time's gone at Lincoln. He's obviously had some very high highs, but he has also had some very low lows. And I think this might be an example of potentially the experiment that didn't work, at least not in the way that we'd have maybe hoped. Don't get me wrong, he's been a solid player for the club. He's scored some fantastic goals, and he's been a big part of what we've managed to do this season when he's not been suspended. But it's yeah, I would be sad to see Danny Mandroiu go, but I'm not as sad to see him go as I am Lass. Let's just put it that way.
No, I'm more sad to see Danny Mandroiu go than I am Ted Bishop, though.
Okay, I would put that the other way around, but I'm just a Ted Bishop guy.
I'm very much in the minority. We've had this conversation a lot over the past season, especially over the last 6 months. I'm a big Danny Mandroiu fan. I think, his technical ability is one of, if not the best in the squad, if I'm honest. And I just think there was such a high ceiling with Danny Mandroiu. And I think, I think it's probably fair enough to say what you did in the sense of it was maybe a bit of a missed opportunity. He came in, obviously had that little bit of an injury worry when he first came in, didn't play until October, was sort of in and out the team, couldn't really fully cement himself a place. But then, the second season, that was always the comment. It was, you just wait till he gets a full pre-season in England. Wait till he gets a full pre-season under Mark Kennedy at the time. This is what he can do for us. I mean, in hindsight, I'd love for him to have had a full pre-season under Michael Skubala and then look where that could maybe get him. But obviously that's not the case. And I just think it's a real difficult one for Danny. Obviously, we hoped to bring him in for cheap and do the whole buy low, sell high sort of prospect with him, follow sort of in what we've done with Lasse Sorensen here. It hasn't quite worked out in that sense. I think, that Liam and other people at the club have said in interviews that there may have been a certain comment or two that was made to the press that maybe hindered that, without going into sort of too much more on that. I
think people can read between the lines on that one, Charlie.
I'm sure they can. and it's difficult because who knows where he could have been or what he could have done. But then at the same time, he's probably got to look at himself in that. Who knows where he could have been if he didn't have that red card, for example, and was able to play the whole way through. So it's really, really difficult with Danny Mandroiu, but it would be a shame to see him go. But at the same time, if we can bring in somebody else and they can kind of live up to that potential that we'd maybe hope for Danny, then great. That's exactly what we need. And the thing
is we do have players that can fit into that role. I mean, the obvious one for me would be Jack Moylan. He has the ability to fill in exactly where Danny Mandroiu was, and we know his ability. Given is running the team towards the end of the season, we know that he has that ability to do so. So it's not one that I'm overly concerned about because we do have kind of ready-made replacements in the squad already. I know that the positions are slightly differing, and Danny Mandroiu is probably a little bit more versatile than Jack Moylan was in the areas that he was playing. But yeah, it's one that I'm not crying over. It's disappointing to see him go, but it's not a stab to the heart like Lass.
I will just say, in terms of players we're crying over today, if you like, or players that we're maybe a little bit sad to see go for whatever reason, that have served the club well in their time here. Two of those that we're talking about here, bear in mind, Lasse Sorensen, Ted Bishop, they came in the summer transfer window of 2021, which has categorically been deemed by the wider Lincoln fan base as the worst transfer window that we've had in recent seasons. And yet we're losing two players here who we're sat here talking about what great servants they've been to the football club and how much it's a shame to see them go.
Sometimes it's a fair point. It is absolutely a fair point.
Long-term projects are exactly what we need.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, the thing that, again, just very quickly touch on last before we move on properly, the fact that he came in as a midfielder and he's cemented the right wing back position as his own, and that's essentially what he's gone to Huddersfield to play. It just shows that, like you say, long-term projects, it's not necessarily about hitting the ground running with every single one, but when one hits, I think the investment that we're going to have from Huddersfield for Lass will more than likely cover one or two of the other ones at least. Like, I mean, Liam said in this interview, just pulling it back to that, he said that we've made 5 times our initial investment on Lass. So if you're in the stock market and you can get a 5 times investment back, you've not done too badly, have you? But that's the business side. But we'll move on to Radio Lincoln. You described them as the jewels in the crown. So we have the 3 star players, I guess. We've got Lass, we've got Ethan, we've got Lucas. Now, we'll start with Lucas Jensen because it sounds like, obviously, we brought a keeper in. We know that he's going to be the number 2 to Lucas. And it sounds like Lucas Jensen is a player that is going to be a Lincoln City player on the first game of the season unless there is a monster bid that comes in from somewhere else. Now, there has been some interest apparently in Lucas, which is not surprising because he's been fantastic for us. So yeah, it sounds like the protection is there in terms of the release clause or whatever it is they've got in the contract. But 1 year left on the deal. So do we see? There was no real mention of it being 1 year plus 1 year like it was with Lasse. So we have a year left on Lucas Jensen's deal. My guess is that there's going to be a lot of fun talks this season about potentially extending that.
Yeah, so from what I understand, it is just 1 more year left. He was a flat 2-year deal. In terms of extensions this year, I guess that just depends on how we're doing, because Lucas Jensen he's good enough realistically to be playing in the Championship already. So to keep hold of him, we're probably going to need to show that we are going to be a Championship club soon enough. Yeah. And at the end of last season, I think that's where our ambition clearly was.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully it's still the same, obviously. I'm not saying that suddenly the summer's gone on and everybody at the club's decided to...
Sorry, somebody has just decided that now is the right time to start trimming their garden. And my window is shut, so I can't do anything about
it. So that's the thing with Lucas Jensen. It's going to be, where does he want to be next year in the Championship? So we need to show that we're going to be in the Championship. Yeah. More than likely is the only way that we'll keep a hold of him. He is good enough to move on. Hopefully he doesn't, because he will be harder to replace than what Lasse Sorensen is.
Yes.
He will probably be one of, if not the hardest player to replace, considering if we're looking to replace a permanent for a permanent, bear in mind. Yeah. Because if we were looking to bring in another loan, that's fine, but then we're just going to start getting back into that cycle again. Yeah. Is that really what we want? Probably
and it's
not.
The cycle that we've spoken about before, and we've said that it's the position that makes the most sense. But you can't do that forever. You do need to have a contracted number one at some point. So yeah, it would be gutting if he goes, but it sounds like we are not anticipating him to leave. However, the other one that was talked about was Ethan Arahan. Now, Ethan Arahan, we found out that he has 2 years left on his deal plus an extension or plus an option. So essentially, we've got him down on a 3-year or 3 years from now contract, which suddenly means that any fee that comes in needs to be gigantic to prize him away from Lincoln City. So the conversations apparently have been had, and Liam said that there is, quote, significant interest in Ethan, unsurprisingly, both from the Championship and from abroad. Now, whether abroad means potentially Scotland, I don't know. To go back to his homeland,
or whether is that really abroad? Well, Scotland,
it is if you're my parents and we say we're going abroad for the weekend. No, like it's one of those. He's obviously going to be drawing interest because he's been phenomenal for us this season. But the big quote in there was that the asset is well protected, which essentially means, yes, we've got him on a very long contract with some pretty ironclad stipulations in there, which again is music to my ears as a fan. However, I'm fully appreciative that if somebody comes in with a bid that is big enough for Ethan Arahan, he will potentially leave the football club. And it sounds like there is enough interest in there at the moment. It could maybe even be sparking some sort of a bidding war for him. Between a number of clubs. Now, we don't know this. Again, this is just pure speculation. But it's nice to see that players are getting a bit of interest, isn't it, Charlie?
It is. It's difficult.
Yes.
It kind of goes into that whole last thing of head versus heart. Your heart is unbelievably upset that he's gone, but your head is really pleased the way that the club are obviously conducting themselves in terms of transfer negotiations, that we've got a good amount of money. And that would be the same with Ethan Arahan. Mm-hmm. I think he would be harder to replace than what Lasse is. Again, I think he would probably be the hardest to replace, if I'm honest, because to have a top quality midfielder just elevates your team to a whole new level. And I think that's what Ethan has already shown that he can do for us. So that would be really difficult. I think we would have to make sure that if we did let him go, we had a very, well, first of all, we got a crap ton of money for him.
Yeah.
And I think, and we've obviously set we'll have set a price on Ethan Erhahon. That will be probably quite high. It will probably be, okay, we're going to set this not expecting any club to go near it so that, we can keep him for the year. Oh, but if they do, wow, we've got more than we ever could have hoped for, sort of scenario. That's kind of what I understand it from reading between the lines in that. And, we don't want to, so therefore we're going to try and price teams out of a move. But then if they hit that one, we simply can't say no. But we would then have to make sure that we had a ready-made replacement lined up. Now, if we were playing just in a 2, the club could think, okay, well, Ethan Hamilton and Conor McGrandles could do that. Well, that's fine. Obviously, then we would still need squad depth as well.
Mm-hmm.
The club will have contingencies on all of these sorts of scenarios. So if he goes, I wouldn't be too concerned at the moment, because I would have faith that the club would, first of all, have gotten a lot of money for him, and second of all, will spend that money well.
Yeah.
My biggest concern with this is if it gets to the start of the season.
Yes, that's the big thing, isn't it? It's like if it gets to deadline day.
If it gets to deadline day, I just don't think the club would sell.
Because that's a fair point. Yeah.
I just don't think they'd sell that late, even if the money was at that original asking price, because that asking price would then go up. I'm talking about 10th of August.
Yeah.
First weekend of the season, and then he gets sold, because then that will suddenly change the whole pre-season plan. Could have changed. And again, I understand the club will have contingencies on this, and I understand they'll then say, okay, well, now we've got this money, so we're going to spend it on such and such.
Yeah.
Sure. But I just don't want it to happen that late from both a fan's point of view and the ambition of the club for next season point of view as well. It would be a big shame.
I'll say, I think the thing that you've mentioned there is going to be the timing, and that's going to be critical. Obviously, it would be lovely for Ethan to still be at the club next season, and we'd still see him in the starting 11 on the first day. So first match after the transfer window closed, I should say. But look, we know that football's a business. We know that it basically hinges on player trading, and the fact that we've managed to find Ethan Erhahon as such a gem and tie him down to a contract that is initially 3 years is bonkers in this day and age, with an additional year on there if we deem fit. And it basically, it means that we are guaranteed to either have a championship class midfielder in our squad for the next 3 years, or we get an awful lot of money. And that is, it's business 101 at that point. Really, really impressive stuff. Hopefully it means the former.
Just imagine if he'd have gone to Forest Green instead.
Because
bear in mind, Forest Green after him at the same time. I mean, obviously he'll be very, very glad that he didn't. But
he's got the Stacey West as sponsors, mate. What else could you want? What more could you want?
He's a top player. There's going to be a lot of interest in him. Obviously, we loved him from the first minute he played in a Lincoln City shirt away at Accrington, where we won 3-0. He was one of the man of the matches. He just showed exactly what he can do, and he showed why there was so much hype around him.
Yeah.
And he's continued to show that. I think there was maybe a couple of, I don't want to say critics, but a couple of people who were a little bit wary about, has he maybe reached his ceiling in a way, or can he quite kick on from what he's shown?
Don't think he's reached his ceiling yet, has he?
No, but I think there was a couple of those maybe when Skripala first came in, and sort of in that interim period as well, where maybe he wasn't quite at that exact same level that we know that he can be. But then he continued to, when we had a winning team, he was on top, and he was outstanding in every sense of the word. But even towards the start of the season, when we weren't necessarily winning too many games, we weren't having control of the ball, we weren't playing some free-flowing, fast-paced football, he was still able to control the game, and that's what he can do in either scenario. There's a reason why there's several clubs interested in him.
100%. Well, look, I mean, we don't want to talk about players that may or may not leave the club. Let's talk about some players that may or may not come in. I mean, obviously, Tom Bayliss is the named one that at the moment seems to be the one that's getting the most attention. But Liam did mention that we are in discussions with quite a few players. It sounds like some of it is dotting the I's and crossing the T's more than anything else. But I think it sounded a bit like replacements for Lasse. Well, a replacement for Lasse is on the way, and there are other players potentially lined up if other players were to leave, which is, like you say, contingencies in place. We know that that's going to be the case. One thing that was quite interesting to hear was that there seems to be an under 24 player that is currently in negotiations. The parent club is they're disagreeing on the fee, so that one could potentially go to a tribunal before the player comes over to Lincoln City. It sounds like that one is kind of done and dusted, apart from the fee, which, yeah, we've seen this before with the likes of, well, we know that we would potentially have to have the conversation around Sean Rowan last season if he decided to leave the club. But yeah, there is a young player coming in if a fee can be agreed or a tribunal can be had quite quickly. Liam also mentioned that we've got Jez has been getting a few air miles in, and he's looking at some players from abroad. Whether that means the Scandinavian link that we'd spoken about before, or whether that means other players, we have a couple of. Is it still 2 slots for players from abroad? Yeah, so we've got 2 slots available there for that option. And then, by the sounds of it, at the end of it, Liam said we're pretty close with one, which we are assuming to be Tom Bayliss, and then he said by the close of the week, we're hopefully going to have 1, if not 2 more bits of business done. So, Charlie, what do you reckon?
I just want to know who they are more than anything else, because it's very, very difficult to talk about 2 random players that could be any one of 5,000 in the world of football.
Come on, you got your scouting set on Football Manager. Just set them to those parameters, you'll be fine.
I've already tried that, but even when you search up under 24 players, still quite a lot.
There's probably quite a few, isn't there? Yeah.
There's still quite a few. Yes, these bloody kids. But yeah, I mean, look, first of all, it sounds good that we're, again, looking at potentially investing in youth. That's another great step for the future. Again, it's what we spoke about, letting players like Ted Bishop maybe move on at the age that they are and such, even though we may have tried to keep him on. If he goes and maybe replacing him, not saying position for position, I don't know, but replacing the likes of Ted Bishop with somebody slightly younger, again, brilliant. Out of contract, so although it's not a free, hopefully it's maybe a little bit cheaper, but we're also clearly willing to spend the money on a fee or a tribunal. Sounds a little bit 50-50 as to exactly what's going to happen there. Again, let's say it is Tom Bayliss that's coming in, if he is just needing to have his medical, as what BBC Radio Lancashire are saying. Again, great, it's another addition. We seemingly wanted to do a little bit of early business this year, which I'm quite a fan of. Obviously, as long as we've got something left for deadline day, because that would make the life better. But it's great to know exactly where we are nice and early. Michael Skubala is going to be able to have a full pre-season with most of the squad by the sounds of it, and even some of these new signings, if they are coming in. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I'm assuming the players will be back on the 1st of July. That's typically,
I'd imagine so,
day,
yeah. So
that's typically the date.
2 weeks, 2 and a bit weeks.
Yeah, so obviously they'll have a week and a half or so at the EPC before they head out to Spain, sort of doing their original kind of fitness tests and things like that. So yeah, look, overall, whoever they are, even if they're players that we've never heard of, and I like to think I've got a decent enough knowledge of players both in the EFL and even some of the bigger names abroad, even if they're players that we've still never heard of, that I've never heard of or whatever, I'm still just going to immediately be excited by them, because Jez and the rest of the recruitment team and Michael Skubala, they're all going to be excited by them enough to actually bring them in. So therefore, we're also going to be excited by them as well. And bearing in mind, if Lasse Sorensen obviously has gone for the fee that sort of is being rumoured and such, we've got a good little bit of money in the transfer kitty. Liam said specifically in the interview, that money's not just going to go to our bottom line, that money is going to get reinvested into players. Yeah. So that's exactly what we want to hear, because it means that, okay, we're not going to be spending big and we're not going to be spending silly and all of this, but we're going to be able to bring in players that maybe before weren't quite available to us because we maybe weren't quite spending the money that we have been. But if we're bringing the money in, why not spend it? Spend it on young players, again, develop, potentially sell them on, or develop enough so that they can take it to the championship. Whether that be this season, next season, the season after. If you're bringing in young players, you're going to have a good few seasons of development where basically it's a new player every summer because they are constantly improving from the year before. It's really exciting times again, and I'm just excited to hear what's going to be coming and the exact player, so that I can just be a little nerd and just start researching them left, right, and centre.
Well, look, I mean, it's obviously a day that is going to be tinged with that news about Lasse's departure, but like you say, we have the capability, we have the staff, and we have the. I think it's probably safe to say we've got the track record at this point of being able to wisely reinvest if someone is sold. Hopefully, those players will continue to come in, and we will continue to have a bit more of a proven record, shall we say, on that one. But yeah, the term excited is probably where I would be. And I don't know, maybe not exactly where I expected I'd be after we said, "Oh, Lasse's left the club." I'd be gutted, but I'm also quite excited about, like you say, what the potential next steps are. If there are, well, I think one pretty close of week 1 or 2. So yeah, potentially 2 in by the end of the week. We don't know. We don't know for sure, but if that is the case, maybe one of those is a replacement for Lasse. It sounds like the replacements search has been pretty deep up until the point at which the deal is agreed, and then they go, right, we now have X amount to spend. Let's go get a replacement. So yeah, interesting times coming out of the club as always. I mean, it's the close season. We are just spinning the wheels at the moment until we can hit the ground again in August. But fixtures released next week. I'm sure we'll probably have some thoughts on that in terms of some dates on a calendar, I guess. But yeah, is there anything else that we want to briefly chat about before we call that a day, Charlie?
Do you know what? That's a very good question. I'm trying to think, but there actually isn't that much. Look, it's been a couple of weeks. Well, it's been a week really. Obviously Friday. It's not even been a week. I'm just backtracking constantly here. It's been 4 days of non-stop news really at Lincoln.
And you know what's happened? You know why this is? It's because Gaz is on holiday.
No, it's because the transfer window's just open. But yeah, sure, we'll go with because it's Gaz is on holiday.
I mean, let's make some fun out of it, Charlie. Come on.
And look, there's been a lot of ups and downs, if you like. Chris Cohen going, big blow. Jordan Wright going, okay, it's a shame, but it's good enough for his career by the sounds about it. Exactly, it's sensible for us. Conor McGrandle's coming in, great bit of business, I think, and the rest of the fan base seem to think so as well. And then we're bringing in another backup goalkeeper. Great, sensible business. Once again, the same as Jordan Wright's sale, that kind of same sort of caliber of feeling. Lasse Sorensen going, big blow. The fact that Ethan Aron's got a lot of interest in him, but we are protected. Okay, great. It's a shame if he does go, but at the minute it sounds like actually we're in a really strong position with that. Brilliant. The fact that we're highly linked with Tom Bayliss, the fact that we're looking at another couple of players by the end of the week. There's so much news coming out of it, and yes, although there are ups and downs, the idea of a transfer window is simply to come out of it stronger than what you started. I already have faith that that's exactly what we're going to do. So, 2 months left, 2.5 months left of it. Again, it's going to be a really, really interesting time. There's going to be lots of news for us to break into. But I'm just looking forward to what the future holds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the comment there about, feels weird to be excited about a player that's getting interest to potentially leave our football club. But we've had conversations on the podcast before. I think you and I have had that conversation. Me and Chris definitely have, and me and Gaz definitely have, about who is Lincoln City's first £1 million player going to be. And I think if the interest is strong enough and if the pockets are deep enough, Ethan Arahan is going to be that multiple times over this season. Because I don't think that sale will start with a 1. I know that's a big shout, but I don't think the total transfer fee for Ethan Arahan would start with a 1 if he were to go in this window. But there we go. That's my bold shout on that one. But cool. Right. Well, we're going to wrap up there, I think, folks. Thank you for joining us live. If you have, we've had a few people on all the time so far. It's been good fun. We don't know when the next podcast is going to be. It's likely not to be this week unless we have some other major news. Because I think scheduling and other things have, like I said, prompted us to do today's. But in the meantime, get yourself subscribed to the podcast, get yourself subscribed to the podcast, get yourself subscribed to the YouTube channel, check out the blog and all the rest of it. And we will see you next time. Up the imps.
Up the imps.